Hey everyone, this is AKKO and today we're gonna show you how to lube all types of clicky switches. Now, there are a lot of videos on YouTube shows you how to lube every type of switches, but almost all of them didn't show how to lube clicky switches. This is because majority of people within the custom keyboard community have misconceptions that you shouldn't really lube any kind of clicky switches because it will ruin the sound profile and the feel of the switch. As a clicky gang, I do think if you did this correctly, it will improve the sound and feel of these clicky switches. Like any linears and tactile switches, lubing up clicky switches will improve the sound profile and will minimize the rattle and spring ping of the switch, and at the same time, it will retain the click sound of the switch. Here's the sound test from different types of clicky switches before and after lubing them. As you guys can tell, there is a huge improvement if you lube up these switches. There is little to no rattle and the sound profile is a bit deeper compared to the ones on stock, and at the same time, it retains the clicky sound. So there are 3 different types of clicky switches out there. One is the traditional MX-Style clicky switches that uses a click jacket, and these are the ones that majority of the people know and they either love or hate it. Even for me as a clicky gang, I usually just stay away from these types of switches because these switches have the worst sound profile in my opinion. They have the highest pitch and they also rattle a lot. This switches includes MX Blue and Green switches from Cherry, Kailh, and Keychron, as well as Kailh's Speed Gold and Pro Light Green switches. Next is the box-style clicky switches, which instead of using click jackets to generate the click sound of the switch, this one uses a click bar to generate clicky sounds, and they produce 2 clicks instead of 1 per press. This switches includes Kailh's box whites, pale blues, pinks, jades, and navies, as well as the box noble yellows and box glaze green switches. And the last one on the list is the MX-Style click bar switches. This one shares the same housing as with MX-Style clicky switches that uses a click jacket. The only difference is that these ones uses a click bar like the ones from box clicky switches, as well as there's a compartment where the click bar is installed right beside of where the LED hole is. The only ones I know that has these types of clicky switches is the Kailh Speed Bronze and Navy switches and the Novel Keys Sherbet switches. So here are the tools you need to lube up these switches. You need a lube brush or any kind of paintbrush that has a size 0 or 00. This is to get better control when lubing up the switches, especially the parts where you wanna avoid. In this video, we'll be using a 00 brush since this is the one I have and I always use it for lubing up any kind of switches. You also need a switch opener, especially that you're gonna open dozens of them. For clicky switches, majority of them uses a Kailh style housing, but there are some that uses Cherry style as well, such as the MX Blues and Green switches from Keychron and Cherry. The lube is up to you, but I heard that people uses the Krytox 105G0 for springs and Krytox 205G0 for the stem and housing. If you have a switch that uses a click bar like box whites and speed bronze switches, go for a thicker lube like the 205G0, as the stem legs of these switches is the same as linears. Just that there's a notch in the back of the stem that causes the click bar to produce the click sound, and this is where you want to avoid lubing. Using thinner lube like Krytox 204G0 and Tribosys 3203 works as well. Let's start off by lubing up the MX-Style switches that uses a click jacket. Open up the switch with a switch opener in respect to what type of housing your switches has. In my case, my Outemu Blue switches uses a Kailh style housing, so I'm gonna use the Kailh style switch opener. Push it down against the opener and you will see that all of the parts of the switch is now starting to separate. I suggest putting each of these parts into a different containers. Grab your brush and apply some lube in it and start spreading on the dish. In this case, I'm using a Pringles lid. Once you are done applying even amounts of lube onto the brush, grab the bottom housing and begin to lube and base of the housing. The only thing you want to lube is the springs and bottom housing. Go around the pole and try not to lube inside of it, as this will make the switch feel very mushy. I do not recommend lubing up the railing. As I mentioned before, this will affect the clicky sound of the switch, and with this, you are done with the bottom housing. Next thing we need to do is the springs. With this, I recommend doing the bag lubing method, where you're gonna put all of your springs inside of a plastic bag with some air in it and apply a few drops of oil-based lube such as a Krytox 105G0 or Super Lube and shake it well for a few moments. If you don't have an oil-based lube and only have a grease-based ones like the Krytox 205G0 or Tribosis, I suggest performing the donut dip method, where you're gonna dip only the both edges of the springs, and if there are excess amount of it, just remove some of it with a paintbrush. You can also do the traditional way of lubing the switch, where you can apply a dot-sized lube into both edges of the spring and spread it around and inside of the spring. Traditional way gives out more consistent results, whereas the donut dip method is quicker. It's up to you which one you're gonna go for, but I personally do the donut dip method when I lube up the springs. And with this, you're done lubing up the clicky switches that uses a click jacket. All you need to do left is reassemble them and press it a few times so that the lube starts to settle in. Now let's move on to the box style clicky switches. Open up the switch with a Kailh style switch opener, as all box switches uses a Kailh style housing. Put all the parts in the separate containers. The parts you want to lube is the stem, both the top and bottom housing, and the springs. Let's start off with the top housings. You might want to spread your lube into the brush evenly like seen in the video. Make sure that there are no visible blobs of lube on the brush. I use a Pringles lid to help spread the lube into the brush. Let's move on to the bottom housing. Add more lube to the brush and grab the bottom housing and spread the lube at the base of the bottom housing around the pole, and you are done. Next is to grab the top housing of the switch and brush one of the railings of the top housing a few times and do the same in the other side. Make sure that there are no blobs at the railing, as this will make your switch feel mushy and sound squishy. If this happens, just remove the excess lube with a brush and you're done with the top housing. The next thing you want to lube is the springs, and this has the same procedure as what I did with the MX-Style click jacket switches. You can do the bag looping method, the donut dip method, or the traditional brush lubing method. It's up to you which one you want to prefer doing. And lastly, we're doing the stems. Add more lube to your brush and apply some to the part that meets the railing. Just be careful to not loop the triangle notch, as this is where the click bar activates the click sound. You also want to apply some residual lube as well to the stem legs, and you can spread it around as long as you don't lube the triangle notch I mentioned. And with that, you are done lubing all parts with the box-style clicky switches. Repeat the process until you have enough for your keyboard. Now, we move on to the last type of clicky switches, the MX-Style click bar switches. Since both Speed Bronze, Speed Navy, and Sherbet switches shares the same style housing, open the switch with the Kailh style switch opener. Like the last two switches, separate the parts into different containers. Now the only parts you want to lube is the stem, spring, and the bottom housing. I personally don't lube the top housing. Let's start off with lubing up the bottom housing. Like I did with the box style switches, add some lube to the brush and coat it evenly until you don't see any blobs of lube anymore on the brush. You want to lube the base of the bottom housing around the pole where the springs are held. After that, lube the railing as well. Brush each railing a few times and do the same on the other side. After that, the bottom housing is done. Now let's move on to the spring. It's the same procedure from the last two switches. Just perform either the bag lubing, donut dip, or the traditional bag lubing method. And lastly, the stems. I would lube the same way as what I did with MX-Style linear switches. The only difference is that try to avoid lubing the triangle notch in the back of the stem, as this is the part where the click bar activates its tactility and sound. Lubing this will affect the feel and click sound of the switch drastically. Start off by lubing each side of the stem where it meets the railing of the bottom housing. After this, the residual lube in the brush can be used to lube both of the stem legs. And lastly, the final residual lube can be used to lube around the stem. Just avoid lubing the triangle notch I mentioned. After this, the stem is done. Once you are done lubing all parts of the switch, you can reassemble them. Press the switch a few times so that the lube settles in, and repeat the process until you have enough for your keyboard. When it comes to filming clicky switches, I recommend filming them as this will further minimize the rattle of the switch. The only type of clicky switches that you can film at the moment is the MX-Style switches with the click jacket mechanism. Sadly, both Box-Style and MX-Style switches with click bar mechanism aren't compatible with any kind of films on the market yet. But to be honest, both the Box-Style clicky switches and the MX-Style click bar switches usually has a pretty tight housing, so you don't have to worry much about the rattle issue. Since you are finally done lubing your clicky switches for hours, congratulations! You finally finished the most tedious part of wielding a keyboard. And that's it for the video. As always, if you find this video helpful, be sure to like and consider subscribing to my channel. And before we go into end this video, I know some of you are wondering, what sound difference does the lube and film clicky switches produces compared from the stock ones? Here's the before and after lubing both Outemu blue switches and box white switches. And as always, thanks for watching!